Targaryen dynasty produced conquerors, visionaries, and madmen. But among all who sat the Iron Throne, one name stands apart in infamy. Aegon IV did not merely fail as a king, he weaponized the crown itself, transforming royal power into an instrument of spite, lust, and destruction. His reign planted seeds of civil war that would tear Westeros apart for generations. This is the story of how one man's vices became a kingdom's curse, and why history remembers him not as Aegon IV, but as Aegon the Unworthy. In the year 135 after conquest, the Red Keep welcomed a prince who would one day become its greatest shame. Aegon Targaryen entered the world as the second son of King Viserys II, born into privilege and expectation. The blood of dragons ran through his veins. The legacy of conquerors shaped his destiny. But from his earliest days, something twisted festered within him. Young Aegon grew in the shadow of his cousin, Prince Aemon. Where Aemon embodied every virtue the realm cherished, Aegon collected vices like other boys collected toys. Aemon was called the Dragon Knight, a warrior of such legendary skill and honor that songs celebrated his name across the Seven Kingdoms. He was everything a prince should be: courageous, humble, devoted to duty. Aegon watched his cousin's glory with eyes that burned not with admiration, but with envy. The court adored Aemon. Small folk whispered prayers for his protection. Knights dreamed of matching his prowess. Even Aegon's own father looked upon the Dragon Knight with unmistakable pride, the kind of pride that should have been reserved for his own sons. And Aegon felt every slight, every comparison, every moment he stood in Aemon's shadow. He began to seek what Aemon would never pursue: pleasure without limit, power without responsibility. While the Dragon Knight trained in the yard, perfecting his sword work, Aegon discovered other appetites. He found solace in wine, in women, in the intoxicating thrill of taking what he wanted without consequence. The servants whispered. The court pretended not to notice. His father, King Viserys, was a man of order and governance. He had served as hand to his nephew, the Mad King Aegon III, for years before claiming the throne himself. Viserys understood power, but he also understood restraint. He saw his son's appetites and tried to curb them with stern words and limited freedoms. But Aegon had already learned the most dangerous lesson of his life. Rules, he discovered, were for lesser men. Consequences could be avoided if one was born high enough. And when you were a Targaryen prince, nearly everything could be taken without permission. As Aegon matured into young manhood, his reputation preceded him like a foul smell. He moved through the Red Keep like a predator, his eyes lingering where they shouldn't, his hands reaching for what wasn't his. Serving girls learned to avoid certain corridors when the prince was near. Fathers kept their daughters close when Aegon visited their estates. Yet the realm remained blind to the monster growing in their midst. Because there was still Aemon. The Dragon Knight stood as everything good about House Targaryen, a living shield against the darkness that whispered through the royal bloodline. As long as Aemon lived, as long as his sword defended the weak and his honor inspired the realm, surely the succession would favor virtue over vice. Surely the gods would not be so cruel as to give the crown to Aegon. But the gods, it seemed, had a different plan. When Aegon was in his late 20s, tragedy struck the Targaryen line. Prince Aemon, the Dragon Knight, the realm's champion and hope, fell in battle. He died as he lived, protecting others, defending the royal family from assassins sent by a Dornish plot. His death sent shockwaves through Westeros. The realm mourned. Songs of sorrow echoed in every sept and tavern. And Aegon smiled. For with Aemon's death, the succession had shifted. The path to the throne now led directly through Aegon Targaryen, and there was no golden cousin to stand in his way. His brother Aemon had died young as well, leaving Aegon as the eldest surviving son of Viserys II. The crown was within reach. Aegon's father lived several more years in which the old king tried desperately to prepare his son for the responsibilities ahead. Viserys attempted to teach him statecraft, to instill some sense of duty, to salvage what little honor remained in Aegon's character. Every lesson fell on deaf ears. Aegon attended the small council meetings his father demanded, but his eyes glazed over during discussions of tax policy and trade agreements. He yawned through debates about justice and governance. His mind wandered to the serving girl he'd cornered that morning, or the merchant's wife he planned to seduce that evening. The only lessons that captured his attention were those about power itself, how to command armies, how to bend others to his will, how to use fear and favor to control those around him. These lessons Aegon absorbed with frightening intensity. He understood instinctively what his father tried to teach through careful instruction, that the crown was the ultimate tool of control, and Aegon wanted that tool more than anything. In 172 AC, King Viserys II died. Some whispered he had been poisoned, though no proof ever emerged. Others claimed his heart simply gave out, worn down by years of service and the stress of managing an increasingly unstable kingdom. The maesters recorded natural causes. The truth died with Viserys. But one thing was certain. Aegon Targaryen, 37 years old and utterly unprepared for anything except his own pleasures, now sat the Iron Throne. The crown that had rested on the brows of Aegon the Conqueror, Jaehaerys the Conciliator, and Viserys the Dutiful now adorned a man who would earn the title the Unworthy. The coronation was magnificent, as all royal ceremonies must be. The High Septon anointed Aegon with sacred oils. The crown was placed upon his head. Lords from across the Seven Kingdoms knelt and swore their oaths of fealty. And in that moment, Westeros sealed its fate. For Aegon did not ascend the throne with plans of justice or dreams of prosperity. He looked out at the assembled lords and ladies, at the kingdom now under his absolute command, and saw only opportunities for indulgence. Every noble daughter was a potential conquest. Every treasury was his to drain. Every tradition was his to break. The realm had given unlimited power to a man with unlimited appetite. But his conquests of flesh would prove to be only the beginning. Pois Aegon tinha ambições que fariam até mesmo tiranos recuarem. But when the crown finally settled upon his head, no one imagined how far his depravity could drag the realm into darkness. The first months of Aegon's reign seemed almost normal, at least to those who didn't look too closely. The king attended councils, heard petitions, and made proclamations as kings must. The machinery of governance continued its ancient rhythms, but beneath the surface, rot had already begun to spread. Aegon was married to his sister Naerys, as was the custom of House Targaryen. She was a delicate woman, deeply pious and soft-spoken, everything a queen should be in the eyes of the faith. Their marriage had been arranged years before, when both were little more than children. Naerys had loved another, their cousin, the Dragon Knight Aemon. Whether that love was ever consummated remained one of the great scandals whispered in dark corners. But what was certain was this: Naerys had never loved Aegon, and Aegon had never cared. To him, she was simply an obligation, a sister wife demanded by tradition and little more. He made sure she knew it. where other kings might have maintained the appearance of marital respect. Aegon delighted in humiliating his queen. He flaunted his infidelities openly, bringing mistresses to court and seating them at feasts where Naerys was forced to watch. He mocked her piety, her fragile health, her inability to provide him with the multitude of heirs he claimed to desire. The truth was darker still. Aegon had no real interest in legitimate heirs. He had already discovered something far more intoxicating than dynastic duty. Aegon found that he could use the promise of royal favor to bed nearly any woman in the kingdom. Noble ladies seeking advancement for their families, merchant wives hoping for favorable trade agreements, common girls dazzled by the attention of a king. Aegon kept careful count of his conquests, like a hunter tallying kills. His first notable mistress was Felina Stokeworth, a woman who had caught his eye even before he claimed the throne. But after his coronation, his appetites expanded dramatically. He began collecting mistresses like other men collected swords, each one a trophy to display his power and virility. The court watched in growing horror as the new king transformed the Red Keep into something resembling a brothel. But two women would come to define Aegon's early reign, not for their beauty or their wit, but for the bitter rivalry he encouraged between them. Melissa Blackwood and Barbara Bracken both captured the king's attention, and Aegon, ever the architect of chaos, played them against each other with cruel precision. The Blackwoods and Brackens had hated each other for thousands of years, their feud stretching back into the Age of Heroes. Ancient grudges over land, honor, and blood had turned neighbor against neighbor for generations. By taking a mistress from each house, Aegon didn't just satisfy his lust, he weaponized it. Melissa Blackwood came to court first, a dark-haired beauty with clever eyes and a sharp tongue. She bore Aegon a bastard son, a boy the king named Maya Rivers. But before the child was even weaned, Aegon's attention had already wandered. Barbara Bracken arrived at court like a summer storm, blonde and buxom and utterly shameless in her pursuit of royal favor. She was younger than Melissa, more fertile, and she knew exactly how to play on the king's vanity. Within months, she had displaced the Blackwood woman in the king's bed, and she bore him a bastard who would change the course of history. The boy was called Aegon Rivers, though he would later earn a far more ominous name, Bittersteel. Even as an infant, it was clear he had inherited his father's choleric temperament. Aegon doted on the child in ways he never had with his legitimate son Daeron, showering him with attention and gifts. The court watched this favoritism with growing unease, for Aegon's treatment of his legitimate family stood in stark contrast to his generosity with his bastards. His son Daeron, the crown prince and heir to the throne, received only criticism and cold indifference. His daughter Daenerys was ignored entirely, and his wife Naerys was subjected to increasingly public humiliations. At feasts, Aegon would seat his current mistress in places of honor, while Naerys was relegated to distant corners. He would toast his bastard children, while his legitimate offspring sat in silence. He made it clear to the entire kingdom that he found more joy in his sins than in his duties. The maesters recorded every scandal. The septons preached sermons about royal virtue that everyone knew were directed at the king. The small council grew increasingly frustrated as Aegon ignored their counsel in favor of pursuing his pleasures. But the king didn't care what anyone thought. He had discovered the ultimate truth about absolute power. There was no one who could tell him no. Not his council, not his wife, not even the faith of the Seven, for all their moral posturing. Aegon was the king, anointed by the gods, and his word was law. And so the mistresses multiplied, each one bearing children who would grow up in the shadow of the throne, bastards who carried royal blood but no royal name. At least, not yet. But Aegon's corruption of the court was only beginning to take shape. His appetites extended beyond mere flesh. He had grander ambitions, darker desires that would soon reveal themselves. For a man who collected mistresses with such obsessive dedication, Aegon proved equally obsessed with projects of monumental stupidity. Where wise kings built infrastructure or strengthened defenses, Aegon dreamed of toys. Massive, expensive, ultimately useless toys that would drain the realm's treasury and accomplish nothing. His first grand project was a gigantic crossbow, a weapon so large it required its own tower to house it. Aegon became obsessed with the idea of creating a weapon that could kill dragons, despite the rather obvious problem that there were no dragons left to kill. The last dragon had died decades before, during the reign of Aegon III. This minor detail did not deter the king. He poured gold into the project, demanding the finest craftsmen and the strongest materials. The weapon was eventually completed, a monstrous thing of wood and steel that could supposedly fire a bolt the size of a tree trunk. It was mounted on the walls of King's Landing, pointed uselessly at the sky. Aegon paraded the nobility past his creation, boasting about how it could have brought down even Balerion, the Black Dread. The lords nodded politely and wondered how much gold had been wasted on this monument to stupidity. The crossbow never fired in anger. It couldn't have, even if dragons had suddenly returned. The mechanism was too cumbersome, too slow to aim, too impractical for any real defensive purpose. Within years, it began to rust and fall apart, a fitting metaphor for Aegon's reign. But the king was far from finished with his grandiose schemes. Aegon's next obsession would prove even more costly and far more dangerous. He decided that Dorne, the one kingdom that had resisted Targaryen conquest, must finally be brought to heel. Never mind that his ancestor Daeron had already tried this and died for his troubles. Never mind that his great-great-grandfather Daeron II would eventually unite the kingdoms through marriage rather than war. Aegon wanted glory through conquest, and he wanted it now. He began planning an invasion of Dorne with all the strategic brilliance of a child playing at war. He commissioned the construction of a massive wooden fortress on wheels, a mobile siege tower so enormous it would require hundreds of men and oxen to move. The king called it his triumph, imagining it rolling across the desert sands to batter down Dornish castles. His military advisors tried to explain the problems with this plan. Dorne was a desert. The sand would swallow the wheels. The heat would kill the men before they ever reached an enemy castle. The Dornish didn't fight pitched battles anyway. They would simply vanish into the mountains and strike from ambush, as they had done for centuries. Aegon ignored every word. Gold flowed from the royal treasury like water. Forests were cleared to provide timber for the king's folly. Smiths worked day and night, forging the metal fittings. Engineers designed ever more elaborate mechanisms for this mobile fortress that would never move. The wooden behemoth was finally completed after years of effort and staggering expense. It stood in a field outside King's Landing, a testament to vanity and waste. Aegon visited it often, walking through its empty halls and imagining the glory that would be his when it rolled into Sunspear. The invasion never happened. Even Aegon, for all his delusions, eventually had to face the reality that his military commanders refused to support such obvious suicide. The wooden fortress rotted in the field, eventually torn apart for firewood by enterprising locals. Another fortune wasted on a king's fantasy. But perhaps Aegon's most telling project was one that revealed his deepest insecurity. He commissioned the construction of a colossal golden statue, a monument to himself that would stand in the heart of King's Landing. The statue would depict Aegon in heroic pose, sword raised high, as if he were some great warrior king rather than an indolent glutton who had never won a battle. The irony was lost on no one except the king himself. The statue project dragged on for years, consuming gold that could have fed thousands of small folk during the harsh winters. Master craftsmen were pulled from useful work to labor on this monument to ego. And all the while, Aegon would visit the workshops, ordering adjustments to make himself appear taller, more muscular, more kingly than he had ever been in life. The statue was never completed. After Aegon's death, his son Daeron, showing more wisdom than his father ever possessed, ordered the project abandoned. The partially finished monument was melted down, the gold put to more practical use. These vanity projects drained the realm's coffers at an alarming rate. The Master of Coin pleaded with the king to show restraint. The small council drafted careful arguments about fiscal responsibility. Lords who paid taxes into the royal treasury grew increasingly resentful as they saw their gold disappear into the king's follies. Aegon's response was always the same: more taxes. He raised levies on trade. He increased tolls on the roads. He demanded greater tithes from the landed nobility. When the Master of Coin protested that the realm couldn't sustain such taxation, Aegon simply appointed a new Master of Coin, one more willing to find creative ways to extract wealth from the kingdom. The small folk suffered most, as they always do. Prices rose as merchants passed their costs to consumers. Farmers struggled under the weight of increased taxes on their harvests. Craftsmen found their profits vanishing into the crown's insatiable maw. And all the while, the king feasted and built his useless monuments and planned wars that would never happen. But even as gold poured out of the treasury for these grand schemes, Aegon never stopped spending on his personal pleasures. His appetite for mistresses had become legendary, and each new conquest came with its own costs. For Aegon didn't simply bed women and move on, he established them in style, provided them with apartments in the Red Keep or manses in the city. He showered them with jewels and fine clothes. He paid dowries for their previous children and pensions for their families. Each mistress was an investment in his own vanity. The bastards continued to accumulate, children scattered across the realm like seeds from a rotten fruit. And Aegon, in his twisted way, seemed to take pride in this legacy of illegitimacy. He kept track of them all, remembered their names when he forgot the names of his legitimate children's tutors. There was method to this madness, though the court wouldn't understand it until years later. Aegon was building something, not in wood or stone or gold, but in flesh and blood. Each bastard child represented a potential weapon, a piece on a board for a game that would only be revealed in his final, spiteful act. But that revelation lay years in the future. For now, the realm watched as their king descended deeper into excess and megalomania. The wise lords began to hope that Aegon's health would fail soon, that his son Daeron could claim the throne and restore some semblance of order to the kingdom. But Aegon's constitution proved as resilient as his appetites were insatiable. He ate like a glutton, drank like a drunkard, and indulged every vice available to a king. Yet he kept living. His body began to show the effects. He grew fat, his face became jowled and florid, his breath came hard after even minor exertion. Still, he lived, and while he lived, he ruled. The maesters who attended him marveled at how a man who treated his body with such contempt could continue to function. Some whispered that it was spite that kept him alive, a deep well of malice that refused to let death claim him before he had fully expressed his contempt for the world. They weren't entirely wrong, for beneath all the gluttony and vanity, beneath the mistresses and the mad projects, Aegon harbored genuine cruelty. This was most evident in how he treated the one person who should have received his protection and respect: his wife, Queen Naerys. The court had watched the public humiliations, the open infidelities, the casual cruelty. But as Aegon's reign progressed, his treatment of Naerys became something darker, more calculated. He seemed to take actual pleasure in her suffering, as if her pain nourished something twisted within him. And there was more, much more. For while the realm focused on Aegon's wasteful projects and public scandals, a more dangerous situation was developing in the shadows. The bastards were growing up, and among them were young men who would tear the kingdom apart in their struggle for power and legitimacy. The seeds of civil war were being planted, watered with royal favor, and fed with resentment. The court remained blind to the danger, but fate was already weaving its dark tapestry. The worst was yet to come. While the realm bled gold to feed his dreams of glory, in the shadows, a collection of bastards grew, and with them, a threat no one yet comprehended. Among all of Aegon's mistresses, 3 women would leave marks on history deeper than all the others combined. Their children would shape the destiny of Westeros for generations. Their feuds would ignite wars, and their very existence would call into question the stability of the Targaryen dynasty itself. The first was Melissa Blackwood, called Missy by those who knew her well. She was a noblewoman of an ancient and proud house, descended from the first men who had ruled these lands before the Andals came. The Blackwoods had a reputation for being different. They still kept the old gods, worshipped at heart trees, and maintained traditions that other houses had long abandoned. Missy was beautiful in an unconventional way, with dark hair and darker eyes that seemed to see through pretense. She was clever, too clever perhaps, and she made the mistake of believing that cleverness could substitute for caution when dealing with a king. She bore Aegon 3 bastard children in quick succession. First came Maya Rivers, a daughter, then Gwyneth Rivers. Finally, a son she named Brynden Rivers, though history would remember him by another name entirely: Bloodraven. Even as an infant, Brynden was unusual. He was born with a striking birthmark that covered a part of his face, a red stain that looked like a raven in flight. His eyes were different colors, one green and one red, giving him an unsettling appearance. Superstitious servants whispered that he had been touched by dark magic. They weren't entirely wrong to be nervous. Brynden would grow into one of the most feared and effective rulers in Westerosi history, a master of spies and secrets who would serve 3 kings and become known as the last Greenseer. But that lay in the future. For now, he was simply another royal bastard, cared for by a mother who had already lost the king's favor. For Aegon's affections had shifted yet again. Barba Bracken had arrived at court like a declaration of war. Young, voluptuous, and utterly shameless, she made no secret of her intentions to supplant Missy Blackwood in the king's bed. The fact that her house and Missy's house had been feuding for millennia only added spice to the conquest. Aegon found the rivalry delicious. He encouraged the two women to compete for his attention, showering favor on whichever one pleased him most in a given week. He seated them at opposite ends of his table during feasts, forcing the court to watch as they glared at each other across the hall. He gave them gifts and titles, always making sure the other knew exactly what her rival had received. It was cruelty disguised as generosity, and Aegon reveled in it. Barba bore him Igor Rivers, the boy who would become Bittersteel. Even as a child, Aegor was fierce and proud, inheriting his father's worst qualities while adding his own bitter resentment at being born a bastard. He would grow into a warrior of legendary skill and even greater stubbornness, but he wasn't the most dangerous of Aegon's bastards. That distinction belonged to another. There was a woman named Serenai of Lys, and she was different from all the others. Where Missy had been clever and Barba had been ambitious, Serenai was genuinely good. She was beautiful, yes. The women of Lys were famed for their beauty. But she possessed kindness and grace that stood in stark contrast to the corruption of Aegon's court. How she caught the king's attention remains something of a mystery. Perhaps her very innocence intrigued him. Perhaps he saw in her a chance to possess something pure and untainted. Or perhaps she simply reminded him of better days, before his soul had rotted completely. Whatever the reason, Aegon took her as his mistress, and for a time, something almost resembling affection existed between them. Serenai bore him a son, a boy she named Daemon. And in that child, all the beauty and strength of the Targaryen bloodline seemed to concentrate itself. Even as an infant, Daemon was extraordinary. Beautiful beyond reason, strong and healthy, with eyes that seemed to hold the fire of dragons. Aegon looked at this bastard son and felt something he had never felt for his legitimate heir Daeron. Pride, genuine, unconflicted pride. He doted on the boy in ways that shocked even his jaded court. He held Daemon during council meetings. He insisted the child be brought to him multiple times each day. He commissioned master craftsmen to create toys and clothes for this bastard prince. And he gave the boy a gift that would define his destiny. The sword Blackfyre had been carried by Aegon the Conqueror himself, passed down through generations of Targaryen kings. It was Valyrian steel, one of the most precious weapons in the world, and it symbolized the right to rule. By tradition, it belonged to the crown prince, the heir to the throne. Aegon gave it to his bastard son Daemon. The gesture was unmistakable. In that moment, without saying a word, the king had declared his preference. His legitimate son, Daeron, received nothing but criticism and cold indifference. His bastard son, Daemon, received the Sword of Kings. The court reeled from the implications. Serenai tried to refuse the gift, understanding the danger it represented. But Aegon insisted, and when a king insists, even the most virtuous woman must comply. She watched with growing dread as her son was marked as something special, something dangerous. Her fears proved prophetic. Serenai died young, some said of a broken heart, knowing what fate awaited her son. But before she passed, she named him Daemon Blackfyre, after the sword he now carried. The name would echo through history like a battle cry. Aegon's treatment of these bastards and their mothers revealed something essential about his character. He didn't love any of these women, not really. Serenai came closest to touching whatever humanity remained in him, but even that was more possession than affection. What he loved was the power they represented, Each mistress was a conquest, proof of his ability to take what he wanted. Each bastard child was a living monument to his virility and power. He displayed them like trophies, forcing the realm to acknowledge that the king answered to no law, no custom, no moral authority. And nowhere was this cruelty more evident than in how he treated Queen Naerys. The poor woman had endured years of public humiliation, watching as her husband paraded his mistresses through her halls and elevated his bastards above her own children. But Aegon wasn't content with merely ignoring her. He needed her to suffer actively, to feel every slight as a fresh wound. At feasts, he would toast his bastard sons while Naerys sat watching, her face a mask of controlled anguish. He would discuss his mistress's virtues in front of her, comparing them favorably to his wife's piety and fragility. He would send her gifts from his lovers, little reminders that she had been replaced in every way that mattered. The court watched in horror and said nothing, for who could challenge a king? The small council had no authority over the king's personal behavior. The faith of the Seven could preach about the sanctity of marriage, but they couldn't force the king to honor his vows. The Kingsguard were sworn to protect the royal family, not from each other. Naerys' only defender had been her brother, the Dragon Knight Aemon, and he had died years before. Some whispered that grief over Aemon's death had broken something in Naerys, that she had never recovered from losing the one man she truly loved. Whether there had been anything improper between Naerys and Aemon remained a matter of speculation and scandal. But what was certain was this. After Aemon's death, Naerys had no shield against her husband's cruelty. She retreated into her faith, spending hours in prayer, seeking comfort from the gods that her husband seemed to enjoy offending. She grew thin and pale, her health deteriorating under the constant strain. Maesters worried that she wouldn't survive much longer. Aegon didn't care. If anything, her suffering seemed to please him. There was a darkness in the king that went beyond simple vice or gluttony. He possessed genuine malice, a need to inflict pain on those weaker than himself. Naerys represented everything he despised: duty, faith, restraint, honor. By torturing her, he was torturing the very concept of virtue itself, and his bastards watched and learned. Demon Blackfyre saw how the king favored him over the legitimate prince. Aegon Rivers, Bittersteel, nursed his resentment and dreamed of glory. Brynden Rivers, Bloodraven, observed everything with those mismatched eyes and filed the information away for future use. These boys were growing up in a court poisoned by their father's malice. They learned that might made right, that legitimacy was less important than favor, that the throne belonged to whoever was strong enough to take it. The lessons would serve them well in the wars to come. But even as the bastards multiplied and the court descended deeper into corruption, Westeros continued to function. The small folk planted their crops and paid their taxes. The lords administered their lands and settled their disputes. The wheel of civilization kept turning, grinding forward despite the rot at its center. For kingdoms are resilient things. They can survive bad kings at least for a time. They can absorb corruption and waste and scandal, shouldering the burden until a better ruler comes along to set things right. Westeros survived Aegon IV, barely. But there was one last act of malice still to come. One final gesture of spite that would ensure Aegon's legacy of chaos would outlive him. The seeds had been planted. The bastards had been elevated and armed. The stage was set. All that remained was for the king to deliver his final, poisoned gift to the realm. But there was one last act of malice that Aegon saved, a poisoned gift he would deliver only in death. The years ground forward, and Aegon's body began to betray him. The endless feasting, the constant drinking, the complete abandonment of any physical discipline. It all took its inevitable toll. The king grew enormously fat, his flesh swelling until he could barely walk without assistance. His face became a study in excess, jowled and florid, with eyes that seemed to sink deeper into their sockets as the fat accumulated around them. His breathing grew labored. Stairs became impossible. Eventually, servants had to carry him on a litter, struggling under his weight as he barked orders and complaints. Still, his appetites never diminished. Even as his body decayed, Aegon demanded more food, more wine, more women. The maesters warned him that he was killing himself, that his heart couldn't sustain such abuse much longer. Aegon dismissed their concerns with a wave of his pudgy hand and called for another course. He had become a grotesque caricature of kingship, a living warning about unchecked power and appetite. Courtiers who remembered the relatively fit young prince who had claimed the throne decades earlier could scarcely believe this was the same man. But beneath the layers of fat, the same twisted soul still burned. Aegon knew he was dying. The pain in his chest, the difficulty breathing, the way his limbs swelled and ached. These were signs even his willful ignorance couldn't dismiss forever. Death was coming for him, as it came for all men, even kings. And Aegon decided that if he must die, he would leave behind a legacy that would outlive him. His relationship with his legitimate son, Daeron, had never been warm, but in these final years it turned to active hatred. Daeron was everything. Aegon wasn't. Dutiful, competent, genuinely concerned with the welfare of the realm. The crown prince had spent years trying to undo the damage his father caused, quietly working to restore the treasury, maintain alliances, and prepare for the day when he would inherit this broken kingdom. Aegon despised him for it. The king saw in Daeron's virtue a silent condemnation of his own vices. Every responsible decision the crown prince made was an implicit criticism of every irresponsible decision the king had made. Daeron's very existence was a rebuke. Worse still, rumors had begun to circulate. Whispers in dark corners suggested that Daeron might not be Aegon's son at all. Perhaps, some said, he was the result of Queen Naerys' alleged affair with her brother, the dragon knight Aemon. Perhaps the crown prince was a bastard himself, while the acknowledged bastards carried true royal blood. There was no evidence for these rumors. They were almost certainly false, born from malice and scandal rather than truth. But Aegon found them useful. He began to repeat the whispers himself, openly questioning Daeron's legitimacy in front of the court. He would look at his legitimate son with undisguised contempt and wonder aloud whether the boy had any Targaryen blood at all. He compared Daeron unfavorably to his bastards, especially to Demon Blackfyre, who carried the Sword of Kings and looked every inch a dragon prince. The court understood what was happening. Aegon was constructing a justification for something monstrous. Queen Naerys, meanwhile, had retreated so far into her faith that she barely participated in court life anymore. She spent her days in the sept, praying for deliverance, praying for her son, praying for the strength to endure one more day of her husband's cruelty. She would not live to see Aegon die. Her fragile health finally gave out, and she passed into death like someone slipping into long-desired sleep. The realm mourned her passing. Even those who had stood silent during her humiliation felt shame at her death. Aegon attended her funeral with dry eyes and an expression of boredom. With Naerys gone, the last restraint on Aegon's behavior vanished. Not that there had been much restraint to begin with, but her presence had at least forced him to maintain minimal propriety. Now, even that was gone. The king's health continued to deteriorate. By 184 AC, he was bedridden more often than not, his massive bulk confining him to his chambers. Maesters attended him constantly, trying to manage his pain and slow his decline. But there was only so much they could do for a man who had spent decades abusing his body. Aegon knew the end was near. He could feel death circling, waiting for its moment, and he decided it was time to enact his final revenge against a world that had always disappointed him. He summoned the small council to his bedside. The lords arrived expecting to discuss succession, perhaps to receive final instructions about the transition of power. What they got instead would haunt the realm for generations. Aegon IV, lying in his bed like a beached whale, struggling to breathe, announced his decision. He would legitimize all his bastard children. Every single one of them, from the great bastards like Demon Blackfyre and Aegor Rivers, to the countless minor bastards scattered across the realm. All would be given the Targaryen name. All would be elevated from baseborn to highborn. All would have a claim to the throne. The small council sat in stunned silence. They understood immediately what this meant. Aegon wasn't just legitimizing his bastards, he was throwing the succession into chaos. He was creating multiple rival claimants, each with royal blood and royal ambition, and setting them on a collision course with his legitimate heir. One of the counselors found his voice and tried to protest. He explained the dangers, the civil wars this could spark, the bloodshed that would inevitably follow. Surely the king could see that this was madness. Aegon smiled. It was the first genuine smile anyone had seen on his face in years. Yes, he could see it. That was precisely the point. The decree was written and sealed with the king's ring. Before the ink was dry, Aegon IV took his final, labored breath and died. His body, swollen and corrupted by years of excess, was prepared for burial. The Silent Sisters who washed the corpse reported that his flesh was so decayed it came apart in their hands. It was a fitting end for a man who had rotted from the inside out. But his death was not an end. It was a beginning. The decree legitimizing the bastards had been Aegon's last gift to the realm, a gift wrapped in malice and delivered with spite. He couldn't have his bastard sons inherit directly. Daeron was too well established as the heir, and even Aegon's power had limits. But he could ensure that after he was gone, those bastards would have the legal right to challenge for the throne. And he knew they would challenge. He had raised them to be ambitious, proud, and resentful of their bastardy. He had given them weapons and training, and a sense of entitlement. He had pit them against each other and against the legitimate line. Now he had given them legitimacy itself. The explosion was inevitable. The only question was when. Daeron II became king and immediately understood the poisoned inheritance his father had left him. He looked at Demon Blackfyre, who now carried not just the Sword of Kings but the Targaryen name as well. He looked at Aegor Rivers, called Bittersteel, whose hatred for the legitimate line was barely contained. He looked at Brynden Rivers, Bloodraven, whose loyalties were uncertain and whose methods were ruthless. And he knew that war was coming. Daeron was a good king, perhaps a great one. He achieved through diplomacy what his father had failed to achieve through force, bringing Dorne into the realm through marriage rather than conquest. He worked to restore the treasury, repair relations with the great houses, and heal the damage Aegon had inflicted on the kingdom's institutions. But he couldn't heal the damage Aegon had done to the succession itself. Demon Blackfyre was everything Daeron was not. Where Daeron was scholarly and diplomatic, Demon was a warrior of legendary skill. Where Daeron was cautious and thoughtful, Demon was bold and charismatic. And Demon carried Blackfyre, the sword that symbolized the right to rule. The realm looked at both men, and many wondered, who was truly the rightful king? The question itself was Aegon's legacy. He had made it possible to question the succession, to imagine that legitimacy could be rewritten with a stroke of a pen. He had taught the realm that might could overcome right, that the throne belonged to whoever was strong enough to take it. 12 years after Aegon's death, the first Blackfyre Rebellion erupted. Demon Blackfyre raised his banner and claimed the throne, arguing that his father's deathbed legitimization had made him the true heir. Half the realm rallied to his cause, seeing in him the warrior king they wished they had. The other half remained loyal to Daeron, defending the principle of legitimate succession and lawful rule. The resulting war was catastrophic. Thousands died on the Redgrass field in a single day of slaughter. The carnage was so complete that the grass was said to have drunk so much blood it grew red for years afterward. Demon Blackfyre fell in that battle, cut down along with his twin sons and his half-brother Aegon Rivers, though Bittersteel survived and would continue the fight. But the war didn't end there. It couldn't because Aegon had legitimized dozens of bastards, and many of them had children of their own. Each one was a potential claimant, a possible rallying point for rebels and malcontents. The second Blackfyre Rebellion came a generation later, then the third, then the fourth. The wars stretched on for decades, each one reopening old wounds and creating new ones. Brother fought brother, father fought son. The noble houses of Westeros divided and subdivided along lines of loyalty to the Red Dragon or the Black, all because of a dying king's spite. The maesters who recorded these events understood exactly who was to blame. They didn't lay the responsibility at Demon's feet, though he raised the first banner. They didn't blame Bittersteel, though he continued the fight for decades. They blamed Aegon IV, the man who had created this chaos deliberately and with full knowledge of what would follow. The wars claimed tens of thousands of lives. They exhausted the treasury Daeron had worked so hard to rebuild. They weakened the realm's defenses and distracted attention from other threats. They turned the nobility into factions who trusted each other less with each passing generation. The damage was incalculable, and it all traced back to one moment: a dying king signing a decree with a smile on his face. But perhaps the worst aspect of Aegon's legacy wasn't the wars themselves. It was what they represented. By legitimizing his bastards on his deathbed, Aegon had proven that the rules of succession were arbitrary. He had shown that legitimacy itself was just a word, easily granted or revoked by whoever held power. This lesson would echo through Westerosi history. Future pretenders would point to Aegon's decree as precedent. Future rebels would argue that if a king could rewrite the rules of succession on a whim, then the rules meant nothing, and the throne belonged to whoever could take it. Aegon had broken something fundamental in the social contract that held the realm together. He had shown that oaths were meaningless, that tradition could be discarded, that the only thing that mattered was naked power. And he had done it deliberately, as a final act of cruelty toward a son he had never loved and a kingdom he had never respected. And so, as his corrupted body was lowered into the earth, the seeds of chaos he had planted began to sprout. The funeral of Aegon IV was a strange affair. The realm gathered to mourn their king, as tradition demanded, but there was little genuine sorrow. The great lords looked at each other with calculation rather than grief, already wondering how the new political landscape would affect their houses. The small folk who lined the streets to watch the procession pass were silent. They had suffered under Aegon's taxation and neglect. They had watched the treasury empty while their king grew fat. They knew that whatever came next could hardly be worse. Daeron II stood at his father's grave and felt not loss, but relief mingled with dread. The monster was dead, but the monster had left behind a trap that was already springing shut around them all. The maesters would later calculate the cost of Aegon's reign in cold numbers. The treasury he inherited had been full, restored by his father's careful management. The treasury he left was empty, drained by vanity projects and personal excess. The kingdom he inherited had been at peace. The kingdom he left was on the verge of civil war, but the numbers, stark as they were, couldn't capture the full extent of the damage. Aegon had corrupted more than finances. He had corrupted the very concept of kingship itself. Future rulers would have to work twice as hard to prove their legitimacy, because Aegon had shown how easily legitimacy could be manufactured or destroyed. The faith of the Seven would have to preach louder about the sanctity of marriage and duty, because Aegon had made a mockery of both and suffered no divine punishment. The ideal of the noble king, the just ruler who embodied virtue and wisdom. Aegon had urinated on that ideal for 24 years and laughed while doing it. And perhaps most damaging of all, he had taught an entire generation of nobles that vice could go unpunished. If a king could behave as Aegon had and die peacefully in his bed, surrounded by maesters and priests, then what was the point of virtue? If restraint and duty brought no reward while indulgence and cruelty brought no punishment, why should anyone choose the harder path? These questions would haunt Westeros for generations. The moral authority of the crown had been irreparably damaged. Kings who came after would struggle to command respect because the memory of Aegon lingered like a bad smell. Daeron II did his best to restore that authority through his own virtuous reign. He was everything his father wasn't: wise, just, learned, devoted to his queen and his children. He brought Dorne into the realm peacefully, healed old wounds, and tried to be the king the realm needed. But even Daeron couldn't escape his father's shadow. The Blackfyre Rebellions defined his reign, forced him to spend his resources on war rather than peace, and ultimately killed him, for the stress of the conflicts contributed to his death. His son, Aerys IV, inherited a kingdom exhausted by decades of civil war. His grandson, Maekar, would die in battle putting down yet another Blackfyre Rebellion. The cycle of violence continued, each generation paying the price for Aegon's spite. The great bastards themselves became tragic figures in their own right. Demon Blackfyre was, by all accounts, a genuinely great man. Noble, brave, skilled in arms, beloved by those who knew him. In another life, in another kingdom, he might have been a legendary king. But Aegon had given him the tools of rebellion and the curse of ambition, and Daemon couldn't resist the call. Bitter steel was consumed by hatred, spending his entire life fighting for a cause that brought nothing but death. Bloodraven became the most feared man in the kingdom, a master of spies and secrets whose methods were so ruthless that even his allies feared him. Each of them was, in their own way, a victim of their father's malice. They had been raised as weapons, pointed at the legitimate line and released. They never had a choice in what they became. The Blackfyre pretenders continued their claims for 5 generations. The 5th and final rebellion came nearly 60 years after Aegon's death, when Malice the Monstrous tried to claim the throne. He was defeated and killed by a young knight named Barristan Selmy in single combat, finally ending the line of pretenders. But by then, the damage was irreversible. The Targaryen dynasty had been weakened by decades of civil war. The great houses had learned to play the Game of Thrones with ruthless efficiency. The ideal of unified monarchy under a virtuous ruler had been replaced by naked power politics. And it all traced back to Aegon IV, the Unworthy, who had deliberately destroyed the stability of the realm because he was too petty and cruel to let his son inherit in peace. But would this be the worst of his legacies? Or was there something even deeper that Aegon the Unworthy left behind? To truly understand why Aegon IV deserves the title of worst king in Westerosi history, we must compare him to other candidates for that dubious honor. For the 7 kingdoms have known many bad rulers, and each brought their own flavor of disaster to the realm. There was Aerys II, the Mad King, whose paranoia and cruelty sparked Robert's rebellion. Aerys burned people alive, kept wildfire caches under the city, and planned to destroy King's Landing rather than surrender it. His madness ended the Targaryen dynasty and ushered in a new era of chaos. But Aerys was genuinely insane. His mind had broken under the weight of his own paranoia and the torture he endured at Duskendale. His cruelty, while terrible, was the product of a shattered psyche rather than calculated malice. And his reign was relatively short. The damage was catastrophic but contained. There was Maegor the Cruel, who killed with abandon and married 6 wives in violation of faith law. Maegor built the Red Keep on the blood of the workers he executed to keep its secrets. He warred with the Faith Militant and nearly destroyed the Targaryen dynasty in its infancy. But Maegor was fighting for survival in a hostile kingdom. His cruelty, while excessive, had strategic purpose. He was trying to establish Targaryen rule against religious opposition. And his reign was also short. He ruled for only 6 years before his mysterious death. Aegon IV was different. He was different in ways that made him uniquely terrible. First, he was sane. Completely, undeniably sane. He knew exactly what he was doing with every decision he made. When he humiliated his wife, he did it with full understanding of her suffering. When he legitimized his bastards on his deathbed, he knew precisely what civil wars would follow. There was no madness to excuse him, no broken mind to explain his actions. He was simply evil. Second, his reign lasted 24 years. Nearly a quarter century of systematic corruption, waste, and cruelty. That's not a brief period of chaos. That's an entire generation growing up under misrule. Children born in the first year of his reign came of age having known nothing but vice and waste at the highest levels of power. The long duration of his reign allowed the rot to penetrate deep into the kingdom's institutions. It wasn't just that Aegon was a bad king. It was that he had time to teach the entire realm that bad kingship was normal. Third, and most importantly, the damage he caused outlived him by generations. Aerys's madness ended with Robert's rebellion. Maegor's cruelty died with him on the Iron Throne, but Aegon's legacy of civil war continued for 60 years after his death, claiming tens of thousands of lives in 5 separate rebellions. He had weaponized his own children and aimed them at the future. Fourth, Aegon destroyed something more subtle but equally important: faith in the institution of monarchy itself. Before Aegon, the kingdom understood that kings could be good or bad, wise or foolish. But they believed in the principle of legitimate succession, in the idea that the crown passed according to law and custom. Aegon showed that succession was arbitrary. He proved that a king could rewrite the rules on a whim. He demonstrated that legitimacy itself was just a word, and the throne belonged to whoever could take it. This lesson would echo through history. Every pretender afterward would point to Aegon's deathbed decree as precedent. Every rebel would argue that if succession could be changed once, it could be changed again. The stability of monarchy depends on everyone agreeing to follow the same rules, and Aegon had shown that the rules were meaningless. He had broken the social contract that held the realm together. Fifth, Aegon's cruelty was personal and sustained. Aerys lashed out in paranoid fits. Maegor killed for strategic purposes, but Aegon tormented his wife for decades, not because it served any purpose, but because he enjoyed her suffering. He elevated his bastards and mocked his legitimate children because their pain amused him. There was something sadistic in Aegon that went beyond the usual vices of bad kings. He didn't just fail to be good, he actively delighted in being evil. And finally, Aegon had every opportunity to be better. He wasn't born into impossible circumstances like Aerys, who inherited a fragile kingdom. He wasn't facing existential threats like Maegor. Aegon inherited a stable, prosperous kingdom from a competent father. He had good advisors. He had resources. He had time. He could have been a decent king with minimal effort. He chose to be terrible instead. This is what makes Aegon IV uniquely monstrous among Westeros's bad kings. He wasn't mad or desperate or facing impossible odds. He was simply a man of enormous appetites and petty cruelties who happened to have absolute power. And he used that power to indulge every vice and spite every virtue for 24 years. The maesters who named him the Unworthy understood exactly what they were doing. It wasn't just that he was unworthy of the crown, he was unworthy of being called a man. He had every advantage, every opportunity, every reason to be better, and he chose to be worse. And when death finally claimed him, when he could have at least departed in peace and let the realm heal, he instead delivered one final blow. The deathbed legitimization wasn't an act of generosity toward his bastard children. It was an act of spite toward his legitimate son and the kingdom itself. Aegon the Unworthy looked at Westeros, a realm that had given him everything, and decided his parting gift would be civil war. That choice reveals everything we need to know about Aegon IV. A good king thinks about the realm's future. A competent king thinks about his legacy. Even a mediocre king wants his children to inherit in peace. Aegon wanted chaos. He wanted blood. He wanted to punish the world for existing without his permission. The small folk who suffered under his taxation, the nobles who watched their kingdom rot, the maesters who recorded his excesses, none of them could stop him. Because Aegon had discovered the fundamental truth about absolute monarchy. There is no check on a king who refuses to be checked. The institutions meant to restrain bad rulers. The small council, the faith, tradition itself. All proved useless against a man who simply didn't care what anyone thought. Aegon taught Westeros a terrible lesson about the fragility of civilization. All the laws and customs and moral codes in the world mean nothing if the person at the top decides to ignore them. And this is why his reign matters, even centuries later. Aegon the Unworthy stands as the ultimate warning about unchecked power. He shows us what happens when appetites replace judgment, when spite replaces wisdom, when one man's vices become a kingdom's policy. Every society must grapple with this question. What do we do when the person in charge is fundamentally unfit to lead? How do we protect ourselves from rulers who see power as a tool for personal gratification rather than public service? Westeros had no good answer to that question. The realm suffered for 24 years and then suffered for 60 more as Aegon's poisoned legacy played out. Tens of thousands died because one man couldn't set aside his appetites and his spite long enough to think about anyone but himself. The Blackfyre Rebellions eventually ended. The kingdom survived, as kingdoms tend to do. But it survived diminished, weakened, forever changed by what Aegon had done. The Targaryen dynasty never fully recovered its moral authority. The nobility never fully trusted the crown again. The precedent of the deathbed legitimization lingered like a curse, ready to be invoked by any ambitious pretender. In the great tapestry of Westerosi history, Aegon IV's reign appears as a dark stain, a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong when the wrong person gains absolute power. Future generations would look back at his reign and ask themselves, how did we let this happen? How did one man cause so much damage? The answer was simple and terrifying. Because he could. Because no one stopped him. Because the system had no defense against a king who was willing to burn everything down to satisfy his own desires. When the maesters of the Citadel write their histories, they must choose what names to give their subjects. Kings who bring peace earn epithets like the Conciliator or the Wise. Warriors who defend the realm become the Bold or the Valiant. Even tyrants sometimes earn grudging respect. The Cruel suggests at least a kind of terrible strength. But for Aegon IV, they chose the most damning word in their vocabulary: unworthy. Not unworthy of the crown, though that was certainly true. Not unworthy of his name, though that too was accurate. Simply unworthy. Unworthy as a man. Unworthy as a father. Unworthy as a human being. It was the harshest judgment the maesters could render, and it was entirely deserved. Aegon the Unworthy stands as the worst king in Game of Thrones history, not because he was the cruelest. Maegor tortured more brutally. Not because he was the maddest. Aerys descended into genuine insanity, but because he had every opportunity to be better and chose to be worse. Because he used his power not to build, but to destroy. Because he looked at the future and decided his legacy would be chaos. He transformed the crown from a symbol of justice into a tool of oppression. He turned the throne room into a stage for his cruelties. He made the Red keep itself complicit in his vices. And when death finally came for him, when he could have at least let the realm begin to heal, he instead ripped open wounds that would bleed for generations. The 5 Blackfyre Rebellions, the tens of thousands of dead, the noble houses torn apart by divided loyalties, all of it traces back to one man's decision to legitimize his bastards out of spite. One signature on one piece of parchment caused more suffering than most wars. That was Aegon's genius, if we can call it that. He understood that the greatest damage isn't always done with swords and fire. Sometimes it's done with laws and decrees, with institutional rot, with the corruption of the very systems meant to protect people from tyranny. He proved that a king doesn't need to be mad to be monstrous. Sanity combined with malice is far more dangerous than madness alone. A mad king might be deposed or controlled. a sane king who chooses evil with full knowledge of what he's doing. That king is almost impossible to stop. The Iron Throne is forged from 1,000 swords, melted together by dragonfire. It's uncomfortable by design, meant to remind rulers that kingship is a burden, not a pleasure. Aegon the Conqueror supposedly built it that way deliberately, so that no king could ever sit easy. Aegon IV somehow managed to sit that throne for 24 years and learn nothing from its discomfort. The throne that was meant to humble him instead became just another tool for his appetites. He proved that some people cannot be taught, cannot be redeemed, cannot be trusted with power under any circumstances. And so we return to where we began, to the question of why Aegon IV deserves to be remembered as the worst king in Westerosi history. The answer lies not just in what he did, but in what he represents. He represents the failure of institutions to constrain bad rulers. He represents the danger of unchecked appetite, combined with absolute power. He represents what happens when spite and cruelty are allowed to shape policy. Most of all, he represents a warning that echoes across the centuries. Power does not ennoble those who hold it. Character matters more than bloodline, and the systems we build to protect ourselves from tyranny are only as strong as our collective will to maintain them. Aegon the Unworthy showed us what happens when that will fails. He showed us what happens when good people stand by and
with his father before anything else touched his day. He knew that the soul needs stillness before it needs information. He knew that the heart needs reassurance before it needs tasks. He knew that the presence of God is the only voice strong enough to shape a peaceful beginning. So I ask you again, gently and without pressure, what is the first voice that enters your heart each morning? And what could happen in your life if that voice became the voice of God? What if the first thing you reached for was not your phone, but a moment of stillness? What if your first touch was not the glow of a screen, but the warmth of God's presence resting gently over your spirit? This small choice can become a doorway to a different kind of morning, and slowly, a different kind of life. Let this moment be the place where your heart learns to breathe again.